Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Newburyport Literary Festival. My name is Leslie Hendrickson. I'm on the steering committee of the festival, and even though I can't see you, I'm really glad you're here. We are excited about the festival this year. This is our second year online and our 16th edition. We hope to be back in person next year, but this format has allowed us to bring new and different authors to the festival. In fact, it's our biggest festival ever with more than 100 participants. Just a few things before we get started. We are using the webinar format, so you probably know this already, but you'll see and hear the panelists. You won't be able to see yourself. If you have comments, please use the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Feel free to let everyone know where you're from, or if you're new to the festival or an old friend. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A tab below. That allows the presenters to see the questions clearly and keep them organized. Today is Independent Bookstore Day, and we want to support our independent bookstore partners. So links to our partners, the Bookshop of Beverly Farms and Jabberwocky Bookshop in Newburyport, will be in the chat, and they have books from all of our authors in the festival, and we encourage you to support them or your own local independent bookshop. We also have 2 days of awesome stuff planned, so please come back. The Literary Festival website has all the information about what's happening this weekend, and we've got a great lineup. So to get started, I'm going to introduce our panelists for Tiny Love Stories. First is Adam Chandler. Adam is a North Carolina native who managed to find his way from studying mathematics in the UK to an attorney and speechwriter in Washington, DC. He has contributed personal narratives to several sections of the New York Times, and his opinion pieces have appeared in Slate, USA Today, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and the National Law Journal. Bethany Groff Dorau is the author of A Newburyport Marine in World War I, The Life and Legacy of Eben Bradbury, and A Brief History of Old Newbury. She is also on the planning committee of the Newburyport Literary Festival and has published articles in the New York Times, the New England Quarterly, and more. Miya Lee is the Modern Love Project's editor at the New York Times. She co-hosts the Modern Love podcasts and reads submissions to Modern Love. She also selects and edits Tiny Love Stories and helps develop them into columns, helps develop the column special projects like the Amazon TV show. I'm sorry. She was born and raised in New York City, and she lives in Brooklyn. So Miya, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome, thank you for having me. Thank you to the Newburyport Literary Festival for having me, and to Bethany for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here, especially with Adam and Bethany. So I just wanted to tell everyone a little bit about Modern Love and Tiny Love Stories. Modern Love is an essay column in the Style section of the New York Times. We publish 1,500 to 1,700 word essays about real relationships written by anyone who submits all over the world. And the relationships don't have to be romantic. It could be about, family or friends, or even sometimes, the relationships you have with yourself. So Daniel Jones, my boss, he started the column in 2004 with his wife, the novelist Kathy Hammer. And he hasn't missed a publication of an essay since. Every week, every Friday online and Sunday in print. And so I started working for the column in 2014 as a submission reader and became more involved with it. And now Dan and I are both editors of the column. But in the summer of 2018, Dan and I were talking about the thousands of submissions we receive. We only publish one essay a week, but we had all these submissions. We knew that there was an audience for these stories. And so we were thinking of ways that we could kind of extend Modern Love in a new form, in a way that would complement the column without necessarily competing with the column, and in a way that we can manage. So we came up with the idea of Tiny Love Stories, which are love stories that are no more than 100 words, accompanied by a photo that relates to the story. And in October 2018, we asked readers, we put out a call out saying, what kind of love story can you say or tell in 100 words or fewer? And we were very lucky to receive so many great submissions, including those of Bethany and Adam. And Adam, I believe your story actually published in maybe the second column we ever published in October. So I was wondering if you could read it and also tell us a little bit about how it came to be, how you heard about it, what prompted you to submit. And last thing I'll mention also, since publishing these tiny love stories, we published a book of tiny love stories. We compiled 175 of some of our favorite, also including Adam's and Bethany's.
Well, thank you, Mia. Yes, I'll begin by reading my submission. This ran in October 2018. And I should say, my internet appears to be a little blippy, so if I cut out, you can just come back to me. But here goes. For a decade, I've watched my former classmates settle into the conventional domestic pattern: husband, wife, baby, house. They look grown up now. They look like their parents. I, however, remain single at 34, pulling all-nighters and eating cake for dinner. I drive an hour for good ramen. I skip town for the weekend. I watch Netflix with impunity. No one is angry about the dishes. Marriage sent my classmates down a steadier path, one that rarely crosses my more itinerant course. I do miss them, but for me, saying congratulations on your engagement is too often another way of saying goodbye.
I love that last line. I think about it all the time.
Thanks. And yeah, I sort of have only, I guess, 2 more years of evidence that can be the case, that last line. But yeah, what prompted it, what brought it about? So I would start by saying I'm like a total diehard of the New York Times in general, and I've always read Modern Love every week. And I'm such a diehard of the Times that I consume it by going first to the Times Wire, which is this like minute by minute chronicle of what's being posted on the website. So I basically see everything that goes up. And so I saw the call for submissions in the Times Wire. I didn't even like notice it at the bottom of the Modern Love column or whatever. And it really, sparked just a lot of thoughts, because your initial naive thought is like, well, who can't write 100 words? Exactly. And, I had published, in the New York Times prior in different things like Metro Diary and the op-ed page and letters and whatnot. And this was sort of a new terrain. And I was like, well, let me think about this. Maybe I can give it a shot. I really, really responded to and loved the idea of compressing a story, an idea into, as few words as possible. I am a lawyer, so I'm up against word counts a lot. And I think editing down is, well, it's a skill one, but I also think it invariably strengthens what you're saying, because it really helps crystallize and surface what is actually there that needs to be said. Mm-hmm. And it reminded me of one particular law school makes you submit an additional essay that is 250 words about anything you want to write about. It's kind of infamous in law school application world. And 250 words we thought was like a difficult editing task, but to get it down to 100 and to fit under the brand name Modern Love, I thought was like a real challenge, because you want to say something substantive and personal and really convey something meaningful, even though you can't get to every corner of it in 100 words. So I like the challenge. I like that the knowledge that, you were calling for submissions, like you wanted to hear from people. And so there was a chance that like real reader submissions would get in. I think that's pretty much what it all is, but you suspect when other places, other publications advertise submissions, it's like, well, you have in the back of your head, well, they're just going to solicit pieces themselves, or they'll hear from PR people. But this seemed like a genuine, like, we want to hear from our readers. So yeah, I wrote this up, submitted it. And I guess I gave myself the extra challenge of submitting a modern love piece while not being in a relationship. I mean, the great majority of the pieces are about romantic relationships, familial relationships, and that wasn't what I planned to write about. So it ended up having, I think what my perspective was, maybe what made it, interesting to you as an editor, was just, I was presenting an outsider's perspective of like so many of your other columns. This is someone who remains on the single side of the fence, but looking at people who have found, romantic relationships and marriages and sort of the course that they have been on. And I'm like this alien dropped into the world looking at this and kind of, telling you what I see. So anyway, that was how it came about. And yeah, happy to take questions, or we can throw to Bethany.
Questions from you? No, thank you for sharing that. That is also my hope also, or my experience editing the pieces too, often, I mean, I called you guys up when I was interested in your piece, and I tried to look for new details or, you know, anything that we could add into the story, but the process of having to kind of pare down just makes it so much stronger. Yeah. What was, I guess, my personal curiosity of what was it like to share and have this piece published? Because I'm always struck by like the bravery to publish these personal stories. I'm not brave enough to share, but I appreciate you doing it.
And I would step back for one little bit of context, because I had run a previous piece in the op-ed page in which I came out as a gay man in 2013, and so that felt much more like jumping off a cliff than the Tiny Love story. So I felt like I had, you know, built up some immunity to oversharing in the paper. But no, this one felt. Well, first of all, I'll say I heard, you know, great things from people who saw it, and I'm always shocked by like how far these pieces reach when they are in the Times. You know, I heard from a former intern who, you know, had, you know, talked to me about dating and whatnot over the years, and he was just like, you know, you really just don't know what you're missing. And I'm always helpful for good life lessons from former interns. That's great. But I think I did really want to be careful to convey that I'm being non-judgmental. Like I didn't want this to appear as like, you know, one course is better than the other, because that's really not how I feel. I think, you know, we've made different choices, different things have happened in our lives. We've gone different directions for all sorts of reasons. There's no right or wrong. And I don't see that, but I definitely wanted to be cautious about it looking like, oh, like when you're single, you can do whatever you want and that's the best. Because that's really not what I wanted to convey. And I'm glad that I didn't hear feedback from people saying that was how they.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, yeah, that last line is pretty amazing. Bethany, I was wondering if you could possibly read your piece that also appeared in column, also appears in the book. And you actually published 2 Tiny Love stories. Only one's in the book, but they're both really delightful. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Miya, and thank you, Adam, so much for responding to my invitation. As soon as I heard this was happening, and the white cover doesn't really do well on Zoom. As soon as I heard it was a book, I was like, literary festival, because we're constantly sort of on the talent hunt, friends and family. And I was so excited, first of all, to meet you, Miya, because we had so many communications. Poor Miya was sort of bombarded with submissions from me for a while, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So I am on page 166. Someone in the chat asked for page numbers. So this is called Finding a Date in Divorce Group. Speaking of oversharing. In Massachusetts, if you're divorcing and have children under 18, you must complete a parenting program. For 5 Wednesday nights, my friend and I were buzzed into the local middle school, where we sat at small desks among other newly single parents, the crying blonde in scrubs, the angry landscaper, the excited executive. I brought gin in an orange Nalgene bottle. He hadn't eaten for days. On the night I saw my son's geography project propped up on the classroom radiator, we kissed behind the clothing donation bin, and I thought I would die of grief and hope.
So beautiful.
Oh, it gives me a little verklempt, really. Especially with the sidebar that the man that I kissed behind, not the dumpster, but the clothing donation bin.
The dumpster.
Is my husband and is in the kitchen right now. So it's extra sweet. It's definitely a love story to him. But I started writing these because I have a very frantically busy life, as I know Adam does as well. And I needed to write, and I needed a prompt. And there's no way that I could make myself write something that felt personal and creative unless I felt like I was delivering it to someone. And so this was completely, you know, poor me, I had no idea that she was my, you know, my target. Or, you know, I wrote several, so if I had enough time and I felt a story sort of welling up, I would write a full-length piece. And most of them never got submitted but it was the idea that if it spoke to me, I could submit it, that made me sit down and do it. So I started writing Tiny Love stories when I had just enough time to write 100 words or less, and something sort of bubbled up that was short, like a poem almost.
Yeah.
I think in my youth, I would have written these as poems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I mean, I probably still could, but this is the way they came to me. And I also wrote full-length stories. And in fact, one of my full-length stories was published in August of last year, July of last year, I think. And it was, that was a stunning experience as well. But this one was the first one that was published. My husband got in the New York Times style section. This is what he tells people. Not that I wrote a love story to him, but that there was a picture of him in the style section. He's very proud of that. So it was a really awful time in both of our lives. As you can imagine, we were both getting divorced. We both, as the story said, had young children. And we had to go to this class, which I can only sort of compare to like a driver's ed class. Nobody wanted to be there, including the instructors. It was sort of gruesome and cautionary tales abounded in the room. But I remember, you know, he actually called it divorce camp. He said, "Do you want to go to divorce camp with me?" And, you know, knowing that I had to do it anyway, I said, okay. So we went, and we were both so miserable and so bereft. And at the same time, and this is the secret, we had such a good time in divorce camp in the middle of the worst time in our lives. And I remember thinking, if this can be fun, if this horrifying event where we, you know, cry all the time and shake can be made fun somehow, then this is the person that I need to be with. So eventually he came around to that idea as well, and we got married in 2014. But that was the seeing my son's project on the radiator of this room where we had gone. Mm-hmm. Oh, that was hard. It was Chad, by the way. It was a project on Chad, the country of Chad. And that was when we sort of, you know, it couldn't possibly be worse, and yet something really lovely came out of it. And that was where that story came from. It was incredibly meaningful to me that was published, because again, I had been writing several. It became sort of a gratitude journal for me. You know, when I'd write a lot of people sit down and write a little, like, what I'm thankful for. And I loved the idea of thinking about how many love stories, how many different ways you can approach the idea of a love story. Like Adam's sort of, you know, love having, you know, the perspective on other people's relationships there and on your own way of being in the world. I think that was really lovely. And it was almost, you know, a couple of weeks sometimes would sort of bubble up, and it just felt good to put them down. Mm-hmm. So I did not foist all of them on Miya, but I did foist a second one, got picked up. So if it's okay with you, I'll be indulgent and read my second one as well.
Totally.
So this is so indulgent that it's just a picture of me looking fly at age 17.
It's important to the piece. You should show it if you can.
Oh, no, I just have it printed out, just the text. But you can look me up. There it is. It's called A 30-Year Gaze. And I'm sure you're all avid readers of modern love. So when you were 18 and I was 17 and I decided to leave high school, my grandmother asked for a picture of me for her bookshelf. She wanted a portrait to place next to the framed photos of her other grandchildren, all smiling in caps and gowns. I gave her the picture that you had taken in the field behind my house, cropped to hide my unbuttoned dress, my splotchy chest. Although our relationship didn't last, for the next 30 years, I had to look at a picture of me looking at you. So that obviously is not about my current husband. So we're glad that's not the one that made it into the book.
Definitely a different perspective. And you attached the photo of you looking at him. I love that, of like, you had that private knowledge of who took the photo. Your grandma didn't, but I liked how sexy the piece was too. Seemed very young and nice. One thing I'll note about that piece is we very rarely use second person. So you, that address, but I think in that piece in particular, it kind of worked because it was kind of like this, you know, direct address to this one person looking out of that frame, looking out from the piece in the picture. And I believe that the person you were addressing actually did receive the message in the bottle, right?
He did. And I got a photograph. He was my friend on Facebook, you know, through some tangential connection. And he sent me a picture of him. Mm. He lives on the West Coast. So he was looking at the picture of me in the New York Times, which was a picture of me looking at him when I was 17. So it was very sort of meta, multi-layered.
Yeah.
But it was lovely because I think a lot of us, you lose touch with people, obviously, over many years. Some you should lose touch with, probably. But it's nice to have a little gift, like just thinking about you just this much, That was a nice thing that passed sort of between us after a long time with no contact. So it was great. And it was really nice that was not the one that was chosen.
Yeah.
I will say also the photograph, I found the photograph and there was a little lie in there, Miya, I have to admit. It was actually my great aunt. My great aunt and my grandmother lived together here in the house. And so my great aunt was actually the one who outlived my grandmother by many years. And after she died, she put away we put away all the photographs and everything. I was going through her things, and that's when I found the photo and thought, wow. It was totally blurred out, and one of my friends retouched it. So it was worthy of the New York Times.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys both for sharing those. It's so fun to read these, particularly because in the first piece you read and wrote, Bethany, about obligatory divorce camp. I had no idea that existed in Massachusetts if you have a kid. So I feel like I'm just constantly learning through these experiences and being able to talk to you guys. I'm wondering if we should, if you guys want to say anything else or any other updates, or we can open it up to Q&As or talk about anything else.
I'm actually interested from your perspective, Miya, if you're willing to share sort of what are you looking for when you are, you spend all this time going through submissions. I'm assuming what does that process look like? Do you have people that help you with this? Would you like me to work for you?
Yeah.
How does that go?
It's a team of two. It's me and Dan. We read, submissions to the main Modern Love essay column. And unlike other, I guess, publications, we make a point to read every single submission to the Modern Love column, the essays, the full-length essays, and we respond to each of those writers. It takes us a lot of time, and we're probably about 6 months behind when people actually submit, but we think it's kind of worthwhile to respond. Because Tiny Love Stories are so short, the volume is kind of insane, so I can't respond to every single person, but we have a submission form that I kind of just pour through. I tend to avoid pieces that seem really formulaic. There are a lot of pieces that start with like, we met, at the grocery store and he made me laugh, and then blah, 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 blah. And then the last line is, and 7 years or X years later, we're still laughing. And just kind of like, okay, I find those kind of boring. They're love stories, but I tend to look for interesting details like kissing behind the donation bin, or the double meaning of congratulations on your engagement. I think it's kind of cool. And I also like what you said, Bethany, about it feeling almost like writing poetry when you're writing these, because they're so short. I think because they're short, because they're 100 words or fewer, people experiment with the form a lot, which I like and enjoy. For example, I think another piece in this book, someone played with parentheticals a lot of we, talking about kind of the dissolution of a marriage and about how we raised 4 children, but it was like we, mostly I, raised 4 children. We gained career success, mostly he gained career success. And I think you can be playful in these Tiny Love Stories in a way that you kind of can't in the main Modern Love essay form. I think we've only published 1 or 2 essays that have second person, because it does get kind of repetitive to have you. But it's really fun. It takes a lot of time to pour through, but there are so many gems. I really like international perspectives too, because they're only 100 words, as Adam said too. People who might not think of themselves as writers are more likely to submit. And I think that's kind of amazing.
Could I ask one too? Well, I mean, actually, I sort of have a small question, big question, but the small one is, do you get many submissions under 100 words, or do you run a lot of pieces under 100 words, or are they all like hitting the max because they've been like scalpeled down right to the word limit? But then I'm also curious, you know, I've listened to the podcast for years. I hear you and Dan talk about, you know, well, not just what you're looking for, but I think the perspective that you both gain by reading submissions from all over the world, tons and tons and tons of submissions, I think you get a barometer for what is boring, like what is a common pattern story, and what is like truly unique that we may not have because our social networks are, you know, only as big as they are, but you're hearing from thousands and thousands of people all the time. I guess I'm just inviting you to make like any observation at all about, you know, something that has surprised you from like getting this window into so many people's personal lives.
Really great questions. The first one's easier, so I'll tackle that. We tend to, I thought it was just gonna, we have had a few very short pieces, which are often really funny. One that was like, Dakota asked me to prom so long as he, quote, couldn't find anyone better, period. We are married now. I guess he couldn't. And then it was a picture of them at prom, just funny. That was a really short one, which I liked, but they tend to be right up against the word limit. I think because I also call the authors most of the time, and try to extract as much information and try to put in as much information and detail in the pieces as possible. Dan and I, every week, we have an editing session and we're just struggling, you know, cutting this word or that and trying to fit it under the word limit. So they're usually 100 words. General insight that I get from reading the column, it is, I mean, sometimes it could be kind of emotionally taxing, and Dan and I talk about that too. A lot of people write about love when it's a tough time, when they lost someone they love or they're losing someone that they love. And I honestly, as sad as it is, I find it kind of instructive. I think a lot of people could probably relate to even this year or two of just being reminded of mortality and reminded how, you know, precarious life is. I take that away from the column, from reading the column a lot, about how you know, love kind of sucks in that it does make you open to grief and to loss, but it does seem to be one of these things that's really necessary for whatever reason. Sometimes good advice too. The back of the book has a tiny love story by a woman in China who said, "My mother told me that relationships are like shoes. No matter how beautiful they are or how much you love them, if they don't fit, there will be pain with every step. Nobody will know it but you." I just love that. Like, I feel like there are so many little things that I can pick up on, or just like pieces of advice. So I feel like, yeah, it gives me a lot to think about, and I'm grateful for it too. I just feel like I'm kind of a sponge soaking up all this experience.
So I've got a question for you, Miya. I'm sure that it is down to your incredible talent and sparkling wit, but have you been surprised at what an incredible phenomenon the modern love has become? I feel like, you know, I could have won, you know, Hollywood Squares for the number of people that came over and said, "Oh, you were in Tiny Love Stories," and then when the full-length piece came out, I mean, all of my friends have watched the TV show and all have strong opinions.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by that? And I guess the second part of my question, it's not even the part of a question, it's a separate one, which is that sort of a comment. I was amazed at how much time you took, and I'm sure this was Adam's experience as well, but you know, the amount of time that you invested in these, you know, 100-word stories, it was incredible. I think we had 3 conversations before, you know, each one of the pieces came out, and you have 5 to do every week. So do you ever wish you were doing that differently, or do you think that that's partly responsible for the success of the Modern Love column?
Well, thank you. I think that's a really good question, and Dan and I ask ourselves that as well, because it has kind of grown in so many different ways, in so many directions. So we do want to think more deeply about like, what makes modern love love, if it's in podcast form or if it's in, you know, television form. I think the focus on the fact that these are like real stories by anyone, you know, is very important and integral to the column. But its popularity and how it kind of has remained popular for so long, I think, I don't really know, but I have a few theories. One, that there's just always an insatiable, you know, desire to talk about love. That's why there are countless love songs on the radio forever. It's something that's obviously important and cathartic to talk about or sing about. So I think it kind of fulfills that need. I think the diversity of the stories we publish also creates, you know, makes it appealing. It's not just one type of perspective or experience. So I think that keeps it fresh, keeps it relevant. I think Dan could probably speak to larger trends throughout this whole time. He's seen like online dating kind of take off. Speaking of online things, I feel like the column launched in 2004. I feel like that's when the internet was kind of getting more popular, and that's when confessional writing, I feel like, became more popular. Now it's like Instagram, you know, people divulge anything, but oops, sorry, there's a lot of traffic. I think the internet had something to do with the rise of modern love too. We used to track how many times the column was emailed, versus now we look at page views. So I think the internet kind of helped the column. And I also think the podcast has helped its reach internationally since the podcast launched probably around 2014 when I joined. We've had so many international listeners, and that's been really cool. And now people listen to it and they're like, okay, I have a story, let me send it in. And that keeps it even more fresh. You know, I think it's kind of growing organically. But it is amazing. And I think it's something we should try to think more deeply about to understand what's happening in our job. Yeah.
So Adam, I have to say, I have to ask if you had any people that responded to your section by asking you if you'd, like to go out with them. did that spur any sort of, hey, I'm here?
No, that's funny. To the Tiny Love story, no, but when I originally came out, very, very publicly in 2013, I got, for that, I think that one went a little bit viral, and I was hearing from people from like all corners of the world, and some of them did come out and, like ask me on a date, but a million others were just like, if you ever want to like talk about this, I've been out for X years and like, let's get together. Which was wonderful, and I appreciated it. But no, this one, I think that sort of response was more needed.
Did you ever take any of those people up on it?
In those days, I was truly like bombarded on all platforms with response to that piece, and I felt like because I was coming out to everyone all at the same time, in the pages of the New York Times, I very much prioritize like the people who had been around me for years, and it's not the normal rollout of a coming out. So I really felt like I spent a lot of time in the days, weeks, months after that connecting with people who I had known through the years and really needed to, I think, talk face to face. Generally, you're doing this in person by person, and I did it backwards, where I did it publicly all at once and then sort of went person by person. So no, I didn't accept a lot of the invitations in the wake of that, but have sort of found many friends since who kind of knew me from that as a calling card.
Mm.
Well, Bethany, I'm curious too, like, did you get any strange responses to your Tiny Love or your Modern Love essay? Yours were, I think, not as open-ended in inviting people to, comment and connect with you maybe, but just the fact of being in the pages, I assume, was like opening a door.
Well, actually, I mean, I will say, of course, the ex-boyfriend popped up, which was unexpected and very pleasant. It was nice. But the Modern Love, the full-length piece, which was also about my husband, had sort of 3 strands that seemed to resonate with people. None of them were the sort of, my husband's doing these things because he loves me, which was my point of the story. We've taken in a group of farm animals from the MSPCA, and he didn't know anything about farm animals and has really learned that whole language and that whole world because he loves me. And that was the point for me. But in there, I revealed that I was raised in a sort of post-apocalyptic or anticipating the apocalypse sort of cult in the middle of the woods. And that for me was a fairly minor part of the story, but it was sort of explaining my compulsion to rescue these farm animals, or my desire to, which I do in my professional and my personal life. And a lot of people who had some sort of experience in some sort of religious group reacted very strongly to that, whether or not they defined it as a cult. There were people that were raised, in various sort of fundamentalist religious organizations that responded very strongly. A lot of people responded to the idea of animals sort of helping to heal trauma. That was incredibly powerful. And it's funny, Miya, we were talking about the sort of international flavor of the work that you do. And I seem to be really big in the Philippines and Portugal. I had more people that responded, which is strange.
Yeah.
But those 2 countries, lots and lots of people sent me notes saying that really touched them. It was really powerful to them. And I heard from some people, this is very weird, but I heard from some people who had actually lived on some of the other collective farms that I grew up on that I hadn't had obviously any contact with since we left. So that was sort of astonishing. Other move survivors from that, or depending on how you define your experience, other people whose families were involved in the move. So that had long, it had a lot of impact and still does actually. But the Tiny Love Story was really just the, again, my husband gets to say that he was in the style section of the New York Times. So that was my gift to him.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you want to see how the audience is finding us today? All right, let's see. Oh, here we go. Miya, is there room for fiction in a tiny love story? Are there ethical implications of fictionalizing a true story? How do you feel about that as the editor?
No room for fiction. They all have to be real stories. Obviously, they're personal accounts. So unlike a reported piece, like there is a personal kind of subjective element to things, but we do our best to verify as much as we can. And every author attests that what they're writing is true.
I remember that being quite rigorous. I had to, I had named the middle school, I think, in one of my pieces, and you were like, okay, well, where is it? Oh, I see it on my Google map. I mean, there was this, it was very, very specific. It had to be exactly right. That's why I said Chad, because I want you to know that.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I wonder if there's a different little branch, maybe not in the New York Times, but it would be kind of fun to have a tiny fictional love story sidebar, maybe.
For sure. I mean, actually, because it is such a nice exercise or appealing exercise to write a story that's 100 words or less. We've seen a lot of writing professors, whether they're nonfiction writing professors or fiction writing professors, creating that same type of challenge for their students. So I think there's definitely room for that, but just not in the style section.
All right, thank you, China. So the next question we have is 4 interesting words that could be taken a variety of ways. Love that involves animals, ? I think I certainly have seen pieces where people are talking about their love for, or their loss of a pet, right? There's an animal that they're close to. Is that's certainly
definitely. Yeah, definitely. There were in the last season of the Modern Love podcast, we ran 2 essays that was about this man getting a dog and how this dog kind of forced him out of his depression in a certain extent. He had to get up and he had to take care of this other being. And then the second essay that he submitted probably 5 or 6 years maybe not, maybe even longer after that, was about losing the dog and how tough that was, but how he found someone else, and it was that whole journey. So we definitely have those pieces about animals, but something interior obviously has to happen with inside the authors, heart, brain, spirit, whatever. I think Dan likes to say we often have, human to human relationships, because while a dog can love you back, it's more interesting to have dynamics, we think, where it's a person who, can reject you more easily. There's that kind of element at play.
All right,
I'm going to say that particular podcast episode and those essays I found particularly affecting. Those were, and I'm not even necessarily a dog person, but I thought that those were so touching and so well done, and raised this other question of like, it'd be so interesting to have updates from, past writers. And you do have that on the podcast sometimes, but his was like 2 fully self-contained essays that, not necessarily bookends, but just installments in his life. I thought that worked really, really well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we just lost Bethany. I'll try to see. She's looking at the chat for the questions.
There's a Q&A tab that has.
Yep, there's a Q&A tab, and you can. I can read a few if you want. I don't know. I guess. Sure. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get Bethany back in a minute.
Right.
So yeah, go for it.
I'm sure she'll join in.
I see.
But this is a question for Adam and Bethany when she returns. Do you find that the writing process for tiny love stories, paring down to 100 words, affects your writing on other longer pieces?
It's a good question. And for whatever reason, I think my style, my brain is so much more attuned to shorter, very, well-honed sentences and phrases. I mean, and it would be the same process, I think, for longer pieces. It would just take a whole lot longer because I'm a person who fixates on, word choice, punctuation, and I really do fixate on those details. I mean, I think that's true of most writers, but I think the 100-word thing is just a microcosm of what I would do in a longer piece. It's just you're able to do it in less time, which is not to minimize how long it does take to get a well-honed 100-word thing submitted, because the extra challenge there is completing an idea within the 100 words that is not as true when you're doing something for 750 words or 1700 words. So I actually don't think it changes the process in my book. You're just able to do it in a little less time.
Right.
Welcome back, Bethany.
Yay, glad you're back, Bethany.
Sorry about that, I had a power malfunction.
No problem. So there was a question about whether writing this short format, 100 words, has affected some of your other writing. Does it make you, pare down your longer pieces because you've had this experience?
What a great question. I think it just makes anything longer seem too long. No, I actually love it as an exercise, and I'm so poor Miya, you're under no obligation to ever publish me ever again. You've done more than your fair share, but I do continue to write these just when they sort of burble up, and sometimes they turn into longer pieces, but I love it. I actually love that. And I love that you can have something that feels finished and encapsulates a moment and is so short. So it does make it a little harder to write longer personal pieces, although I write longer professional pieces pretty easily. But I love it. I would say, I would encourage everyone to try it. It's such a beautiful way to just capture the way that you're feeling about a very discrete moment, or, the details of something that was really powerful. So I still do it. And if I come up with one that's really gets me, you may just see it again, Miya.
We're sort of running out of time, but maybe we have time for one more question. This is from Molly Wentworth. Hi, Molly. Are the tiny love story submissions selected for the podcast, or how are they selected, and is that a different process?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So we relaunched the Modern Love podcast last year. In the past, we had celebrities reading the pieces, which was always fun, but it meant that we were kind of subject to what they found interesting. So the celebrities would choose, you know, we would suggest 3 or 4, the producer would suggest 3 or 4 essays that we think the actor might be interested in, and then they would choose and make that final say. But now we have kind of, because we're not relying on celebrities, we have more control in selecting the pieces. And so we have 10 episode seasons. We're working on one now. It's coming, the new season's coming out in May. And we just try to think of a mix of different stories of light and dark. And we're still experimenting with the form, which is kind of cool and fun. Sometimes stories or interviews after the podcast, but something we're exploring in this new season is trying to get people who are written about in the podcast to come on and talk to the author, which is very interesting, can be contentious, but because they have that familiarity, there's a kind of cool rapport. You can kind of see how they interact, and it's almost like you're just like a fly on the wall in this conversation. So that's really cool. And we're going to choose some tiny love stories as well to pair with the essays. So each episode is going to be kind of different. But in last season, we had a tiny love story at the very beginning of each episode. And we wanted to kind of link them thematically, but we didn't want to limit the meaning by spelling it out, by saying like, this is, you know, how it connects to this. So that's how it was, you know, chosen in the past. We found some type of connection, but we wanted people to draw their own conclusions.
Very cool. And one last quick one. How can people view the television program? It's on Amazon, is that right?
Mm-hmm. It's on Amazon Prime. And another thing to announce, they're also working on the 2nd season of that, which was super challenging to film during the pandemic. Sure. It was wild, but they got it done. And some really great episodes as well.
Awesome. Well, that's a great place to end off. Looking forward to that. And thank you all so much for joining us and talking with us today. And participants, thank you so much for logging on. We have a lot of great events coming up in the next day and a half. And I also want to thank A Mighty Blaze. We've been streaming, live streaming to their Facebook page. So thank you to them. They're a great organization if you haven't checked them out. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miya. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you.
Bye, Adam.
Thank you.